Some secrets are buried so deep, you never expect them to surface. And some truths, once uncovered, change everything you thought you knew about the person you love. This is the story of how one woman's desperate search for answers led her into a world of addiction, tragedy, and ultimately, redemption. Emily Dawson never planned to fall in love. Not then, anyway. She was fresh out of college, stepping into her first real job at a mid sized company in downtown Cleveland, still learning how to navigate the corporate world without drowning. Michael Harris was a few years older, an administrator who had a reputation for being the calm in every storm. When the younger employees felt overwhelmed, Michael was the one they leaned on. He was organized, patient, and steady in ways that made chaos feel manageable. Their connection didn't announce itself with fireworks or grand gestures. It crept in quietly through small acts of kindness. Michael helped her navigate confusing software systems without a trace of condescension. He explained procedures patiently, never making her feel stupid for asking questions. What started as workplace mentorship slowly evolved into easy conversations during coffee breaks, then long walks after the workday ended, and eventually something neither of them could deny any longer. Over time, Emily discovered just how perfectly compatible they truly were. Michael wasn't flashy or loud. He didn't crave attention or seek validation. He was thoughtful, surprisingly funny when his guard came down, and steady in ways that made her feel safe. They shared a love for music that told stories, road trips with no fixed destinations, and the simple joy of cooking dinner together after exhausting days. Within a year, they moved in together. Their Cleveland apartment wasn't spacious, but it was warm and filled with small traditions that became the heartbeat of their relationship. Friday night takeout became sacred. Sunday morning pancakes became ritual. At least once a month, they would pack a bag and escape to another Ohio town or venture across state lines into Pennsylvania. Michael never divided household chores into his and hers. If he arrived home first, he cooked dinner and sometimes experimented with recipes that made Emily laugh. If Emily had free time, she would fold laundry or plan their next adventure. Their life together was seamless, constructed from quiet gestures of mutual respect. Friends often remarked on how comfortable they seemed together, how natural their partnership appeared, but one detail always stood out in social situations. Michael never touched alcohol. At gatherings when beer circulated and wine flowed freely, he politely declined every offer. "I'm an athlete," he would explain with an easy smile. "Been boxing since I was 7. My body doesn't handle alcohol well. Honestly, I don't even like the smell." It wasn't offensive or preachy. Just matter of fact, most people accepted the explanation without pressing further. Emily admired the discipline. To her, it signaled self control and commitment, traits she valued deeply in a partner. She never imagined there might be something darker lurking behind that simple explanation. As their relationship matured, conversations about marriage became inevitable. Emily's parents, Patricia and George Dawson, had known for months that their daughter was serious about this man. Naturally, they wanted to meet him properly. One Saturday, Emily brought Michael to the Dawson home on the east side of Cleveland. Patricia had prepared a feast: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, her famous apple pie cooling on the counter. George, more reserved but equally welcoming, poured drinks and made space at the table. They treated Michael not as an outsider, but almost as family from the moment he crossed the threshold. Conversation flowed easily throughout the evening. George asked about Michael's job, his hobbies, his outlook on life. Michael answered every question politely and articulately. He spoke about his love for hiking, his habit of early morning runs along Lake Erie, his preference for quiet evenings over noisy parties. Patricia noticed the way he looked at Emily, soft but protective, radiating a warmth that made a mother's heart swell with approval. But as the evening wound down, a subtle question lingered in Patricia's mind. Between bites of apple pie, she finally voiced it. "So, Michael, tell us a little about your family." "Emily hasn't said much. We'd love to know more." For just a fraction of a second, Michael froze. It was quick, so quick that most people wouldn't have caught it, but Emily did. His practiced smile faltered before returning, calm and composed. "Oh, they're in another part of Ohio," he said lightly, waving a dismissive hand. "Not much to tell, really. We don't see each other often." He pivoted smoothly, asking George about his work in logistics, steering the spotlight away from himself with disarming charm. Patricia exchanged a meaningful glance with her husband, then with Emily. It wasn't exactly suspicion, more like quiet curiosity. Why had Emily never met his family? Why, in all their time together, had Michael never mentioned them? Emily noticed the deflection too. For the first time since falling for him, she realized there was an entire part of Michael's life she knew almost nothing about. It wasn't the absence of details that unsettled her. It was the way he shut down the conversation entirely, as though certain doors were forbidden territory. The evening ended warmly. Michael thanked Patricia for the incredible meal, shook George's hand firmly, and helped Emily with her coat. But as they drove home through quiet Cleveland streets, the warmth of the evening gave way to an unspoken tension. Emily stared out the window, her mind churning with questions about the parts of Michael's story that remained hidden. He had given her his time, his kindness, his unwavering love. Yet behind that steady smile lurked a silence that stretched further than the miles between Cleveland and whatever town he came from. A silence Emily couldn't shake, no matter how hard she tried. Winter had barely released its grip when wedding talk began filling the Dawson household. Patricia loved nothing more than imagining her only daughter in white, walking down an aisle lined with flowers while every guest rose to watch. George, practical as always, pretended not to care about the details. But Emily caught him smiling whenever Patricia discussed the first dance or champagne toast. To her parents, a wedding wasn't merely a formality. It was a celebration of family, tradition, and the life they had worked so hard to give their daughter. Michael, however, saw things differently. One evening in their small Cleveland apartment over takeout containers and the hum of the radiator, he broached the subject carefully. He began, setting down his chopsticks. What would you think about keeping the wedding small, just us, maybe a few close friends? Something simple, like a courthouse ceremony and dinner afterward. No limos, no banquet halls, none of that extravagance. Emily tilted her head, surprised by the suggestion. She had always imagined something modest yet festive. Family gathered together, music playing softly, photographs to treasure forever. Small, sure, she replied slowly. But you mean no reception at all? Michael shrugged, attempting to sound casual. Why spend thousands feeding 100 people we hardly know? We could use that money for a honeymoon, or maybe a down payment on a house. Something that actually matters for our future. His reasoning made practical sense, even romantic in its own practical way. But when Emily mentioned the idea to her parents, Patricia nearly choked on her tea. No reception? Absolutely not. Patricia's voice carried the weight of maternal authority. Emily, you deserve a proper wedding. We've been waiting for this day since you were born. I don't care if we have to pay for it ourselves. We will. You're our daughter, and you should have the celebration you've always dreamed of. George backed her up with a quiet but firm nod. It's not just about you, sweetheart. It's about family, too. About honoring the commitment you're making before everyone who matters. Emily found herself caught between two worlds. She wanted to respect Michael's wishes, but she also couldn't ignore the sparkle in her mother's eyes, the determination in her father's voice. They wanted to give her the kind of day they believed she deserved, a once-in-a-lifetime celebration. The following weekend, as she and Michael folded laundry together, Emily tried again to bridge the gap. My parents really want a bigger wedding, she said gently, folding a t-shirt carefully. They're even willing to pay, it's genuinely important to them. Michael's hands stilled, a t-shirt caught mid-fold. He set it down slowly, then exhaled deeply. Emily, my parents won't be there. Words landed like stones in still water, creating ripples that spread outward into silence. Emily blinked, startled by the bluntness. What do you mean you haven't even told them the date yet? I don't need to, he replied, turning away from her. They won't come, that's just how it is. But Michael, she pressed, stepping closer. This is your wedding too, don't you want your family there? Your mom, your dad, anyone? He shook his head firmly, jaw tight with something that looked like suppressed pain. It's not possible, they're busy, let's just leave it at that. The explanation was thin, barely more substantial than air. Emily felt frustration rising in her chest. It wasn't that his parents couldn't come. Life had obstacles, and everyone understood that. It was the way he shut down the conversation entirely, refusing to offer even the smallest explanation, as if the subject itself were poison. She tried to smile, tried to let it go. But later that night, lying awake beside him while he slept peacefully, she couldn't shake the questions swirling through her mind. Michael had given her every reason to trust him completely, yet this wall of silence disturbed her deeply. Weddings were supposed to represent union, two families coming together, not just two people signing papers. Why was he so determined to keep his side shrouded in permanent shadow? Emily told herself not to push too hard. He would open up when he was ready. Still, as the days passed, the questions kept returning, persistent and unsettling. Why had she never met his family? Why did he never call them, never mention their names? What was he hiding behind that calm, steady exterior? The doubts were quiet at first, easy to drown out in the rhythm of daily life. But like water seeping through cracks in a foundation, they kept returning, soft yet relentless. For the first time since they had moved in together, Emily wondered if she truly knew the man she planned to marry. The idea had been simmering in Emily's mind ever since that night when Michael insisted his parents would not attend their wedding. He hadn't offered any real explanation, only an impenetrable wall of silence. The more he refused to elaborate, the more her curiosity transformed into burning necessity. A week later, Michael mentioned he had to leave on a short business trip. This wasn't unusual. His job occasionally sent him to other Ohio towns for administrative work. He asked casually if she wanted to come along, but Emily shook her head, claiming she had reports to finish and little desire to wander alone while he sat through endless meetings. Michael accepted her answer without suspicion, kissed her forehead the next morning, and departed before dawn with a small overnight bag. Emily watched the taxi disappear around the corner, her heart thudding with nervous anticipation. She had already made her decision. That evening, while tidying the apartment, she found the confirmation she needed. Inside the glove compartment of Michael's car, where he sometimes kept insurance papers and old mail, sat a folded envelope addressed to Carol Harris in Youngstown. Emily stared at the name for a long moment. She vaguely remembered Michael once mentioning his mother's first name quickly, almost accidentally, then changing the subject. Carol, it had to be her. She held the envelope for what felt like an eternity, debating the morality of what she was about to do. This felt like trespassing, like crossing a sacred boundary she had promised herself never to violate. But there it was, the address he had hidden, the link to a family he refused to acknowledge existed. She slipped the paper into her purse before she could change her mind. The next morning, Emily packed a small bag and told her parents she would be running errands outside Cleveland. Then she climbed into her car and programmed the GPS for Youngstown. The highway stretched long and flat before her, the winter sun pale and cold against the windshield. As the miles accumulated, the scenery began shifting from the bustling suburbs of Cleveland's outer edges to the quieter, grayer margins of Ohio's Rust Belt. Empty warehouses with shattered windows loomed along the roadside like forgotten monuments. Old factories that once formed the heartbeat of steel production now sat abandoned, their smokestacks pointing accusingly at an indifferent sky. The closer she came to Youngstown, the more impossible the decline became to ignore. Rows of houses sagged against one another, porches caving inward, windows boarded against intruders or simply the elements. Some streets looked as though life had bled out of them decades ago, leaving only hollow shells behind. A liquor store occupied one corner, its neon sign buzzing weakly even in full daylight. Across the street, a half-shuttered diner leaned beneath a faded awning that had seen better decades. Emily gripped the steering wheel tighter, her knuckles whitening. She had grown up in a stable middle-class neighborhood where lawns were meticulously maintained and neighbors waved cheerfully across driveways. Here, silence hung heavy in the air, broken only by the occasional barking of stray dogs or the thudding bass from passing cars. Her GPS directed her off the main road and into a narrow residential street. Potholes scarred the cracked asphalt. Yards were overgrown with neglect. Fences had splintered and collapsed where they once stood. In front of one house, a rusted pickup truck sat on concrete blocks, its tires long gone. Laundry hung stiffly on a sagging clothesline, though the fabric was so worn it had faded to near colorlessness. She slowed down, heart pounding against her ribs. This was the world Michael had escaped from, the world he had never wanted her to witness. She thought about his absolute refusal to drink, his avoidance of any family discussion, his insistence that his parents wouldn't attend their wedding. In this bleak landscape, his silence suddenly began making devastating sense. Emily parked near a corner store with a sagging roof and a hand-painted sign that had seen better years. For several long minutes she just sat there, staring at the address written on the crumpled paper, uncertain whether she possessed the courage to actually knock on that door. Her stomach twisted with guilt and anxiety. She loved Michael more than she had ever loved anyone. She trusted him with her future. But she couldn't build a marriage on shadows and unanswered questions. Taking a deep, shaky breath, she started the engine and drove deeper into the neighborhood. Each turn seemed to lead her further into abandonment, as though time itself had forgotten this corner of Ohio. Houses leaned like exhausted old men waiting for release. A child's tricycle, rusted and broken, lay overturned in a yard choked with dead weeds. Somewhere in the distance, a dog howled long and mournful, the sound echoing off empty walls. The closer she came to the address, the more Emily felt the crushing weight of what she was about to uncover. This journey was no longer about simple curiosity. It was about truth, the truth behind the man she loved, the truth he was too afraid or too ashamed to share. Finally, she spotted the number painted crookedly on a cracked mailbox. Harris, her chest constricted painfully. She pulled the car to the curb, turned off the ignition, and sat motionless. The house before her sagged beneath its own neglected weight. The porch was littered with empty beer cans and discarded cigarette butts. Yellowed curtains hung stiff and motionless behind grimy windows. Emily closed her eyes, inhaled once to steady her nerves, then pushed open the car door. The cold air bit at her cheeks as she stepped out, the sound of her boots crunching against gravel unnaturally loud in the empty street. Whatever secrets Michael had buried in this place, She was about to confront them completely alone. Emily climbed the creaking porch steps, each one groaning beneath her weight. The smell reached her before anything else: stale beer, sour liquor, and something acidic that clung to the rotting boards. For one desperate moment, she almost turned and fled back to her car. But she knocked anyway. At first, there was no response. Only the muffled drone of a television playing somewhere deep inside the house. She tried again, knocking harder. A voice barked from within, low and irritated with years of bitterness. The door cracked open to reveal a woman who appeared far older than she likely was. Carol Harris's hair was matted and unwashed. Her face was blotchy and exhausted, her eyes rimmed with permanent redness. A faded bathrobe hung from her thin shoulders, stained with food and what looked like spilled alcohol. She squinted at Emily with immediate suspicion, gripping the door frame as if it were the only thing keeping her vertical. "What?" she snapped. "If you're from the electric company, I already told you I don't have it. You can shut it off, see if I care. No TV, no fridge, doesn't matter anymore." Her words slurred slightly. A bottle of cheap vodka dangled from one skeletal hand. Emily's heart raced with panic. "I'm looking for Carol Harris," she managed carefully. "You found her." Carol's gaze sharpened, scanning Emily from head to toe with barely concealed contempt. "Who are you and what do you want?" Before Emily could formulate a response, a young voice rang out from somewhere deeper inside the house. "Mom, leave her alone, she's not the power company." A girl emerged from the shadowy hallway. She was thin, maybe 12 years old, with dark blonde hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. Her eyes were startlingly green, sharp and unflinching despite her young age. She carried herself with a defiance that seemed decades beyond her years. "Go back to your room, Lily," Carol snapped, her words thick with venom. But Lily didn't retreat. Instead, she squared her narrow shoulders and glared at her mother with barely concealed fury. "You're just going to try to take her money like you always do." "Shut your mouth." Carol lunged toward her daughter, swaying dangerously on unsteady feet. The vodka bottle sloshed as she moved. Lily darted back a step, her voice rising defiantly. "You sold my jacket for booze. You sold the new boots Michael bought me. You'd sell the phone too if I ever let you touch it. That's why he doesn't come here anymore." The words hung in the frozen air like a condemnation. Emily felt her stomach plummet. Michael's name spoken with such raw anger and deep hurt. Carol's face contorted with shame and rage. "Don't you talk about your brother like you know anything. You don't know what he's done for this family. You don't know what I've had to sacrifice." Lily's small hands clenched into fists at her sides. "You've done nothing but drink yourself to death. Daniel's gone. Michael hates this place because of you, and when I grow up, I'm leaving too, just like they did." Her voice cracked on the last words, but her fierce eyes never wavered. Emily stood frozen in the doorway, her mind spinning with the implications of what she was witnessing. She had come searching for answers, and here they were, ugly and raw, spilling out before her like blood from an open wound. Carol turned back to Emily, suddenly remembering the stranger on her porch. Her expression hardened into something mean. "You, whoever you are, you don't belong here. Get off my property before I call the police." Emily's pulse thundered in her ears. Part of her desperately wanted to obey, to run back to the safety of her car and pretend she had never made this journey. But then she looked at Lily, at those fierce green eyes burning with courage and desperation. The girl's gaze lingered on her, silently pleading for something Emily couldn't yet identify. "I'm sorry," Emily whispered, stepping backward onto the porch. "I didn't mean to intrude." Carol slammed the door with explosive force, the sound reverberating through the brittle walls of the house. Silence followed, heavy and suffocating. Emily stood there for a long moment, her breath visible in the fading afternoon light, her heart pounding as though it might shatter her ribcage. Through the thin curtains of a cracked window, she caught a glimpse of Lily retreating down the hallway, her narrow shoulders hunched, her small frame braced against the chaos that consumed her life. Emily understood one thing with absolute clarity. Whatever Michael had tried to bury, whatever fortress of silence he had constructed between his past and present, it was devastatingly real, and it was darker than anything she had ever imagined. The door had barely slammed when Lily burst from the side of the house, her sneakers pounding against the cracked sidewalk. Emily stood paralyzed for a single heartbeat. Then instinct propelled her forward. She couldn't abandon this girl, not after witnessing what she had just seen. "Lily, wait." Emily called, her voice catching in the frigid afternoon air. The girl didn't slow down. She darted between two leaning houses, her small frame moving with surprising speed born from years of practice. Emily hurried after her, boots crunching over gravel and shattered glass, her heart racing not just from physical exertion, but from the growing certainty that if she let Lily vanish now, she might never discover the truth Michael had spent his entire adult life concealing. After several blocks, the crumbling residential area opened into a clearing. An old convenience store slumped on the corner, its sign faded beyond readability, windows grimy with years of neglect. Beyond it, a narrow dirt path wound toward a stretch of water that glinted faintly in the pale winter sun. Emily spotted Lily heading in that direction, shoulders rigid, hands jammed deep into the pockets of a jacket too thin for the weather. Emily ducked into the store first. A weak bell jingled overhead as she entered. The interior smelled stale, shelves lined with canned soup, dusty cereal boxes, and a cooler humming with cheap beer and off brand soda. She grabbed a packet of cookies, a stick of beef jerky, and several brightly wrapped lollipops from a jar near the register. The cashier, an older man with exhausted eyes, rang her up without comment or curiosity. When Emily emerged, Lily was waiting at the edge of the path, arms crossed defensively against the cold and against the world. "Why are you following me?" the girl demanded, her voice sharp with suspicion. Emily held up the small bag like a peace offering. "I thought you might want something to eat, that's all." For a suspended moment, Lily didn't respond. Then, with a shrug that tried desperately to appear careless but carried the unmistakable weight of exhaustion, she turned and continued toward the lake. "Fine. But I'm not going back home right now." Emily followed silently. The path led to a small lake encircled by skeletal winter trees and scattered gray rocks. The water lay calm and still, reflecting the washed out sky like a tarnished mirror. Lily dropped onto a fallen log near the bank, pulling her knees up to her chest protectively. Emily sat a respectful few feet away, opening the bag and placing the snacks between them like an offering. "Here," she said softly. "Take whatever you like." Lily eyed the cookies with barely concealed hunger, then reached for one. She bit into it slowly, chewing with the deliberate care of someone accustomed to rationing. After a moment, she took a lollipop as well, rolling the stick between her fingers absently. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the soft lapping of water against the rocky shore. Emily didn't rush the moment. She understood instinctively that this fragile trust couldn't be forced. Finally, Lily spoke. Her voice was quieter now, stripped of the protective defiance she had worn like armor in front of her mother. "You're not from around here. I can tell by your clothes, by your car. Why did you really come?" Emily hesitated, the weight of truth pressing against her chest. "I know your brother, Michael." At the sound of his name, Lily's head snapped up. Her green eyes widened with surprise, then narrowed with familiar suspicion. "You're lying." "I'm not," Emily replied quickly, holding the girl's gaze steadily. "Engaged to him, we're supposed to get married soon." For an extended moment, Lily simply stared, processing this impossible information. Then slowly, almost reluctantly, her defensive posture softened. "So that's why he showed up last month," she murmured, more to herself than to Emily. She turned her gaze toward the still water, her young voice hardening with bitter understanding. "He doesn't talk about us, does he?" Emily shook her head gently. "No, he never has. That's exactly why I came. I wanted to understand what he's been hiding." Lily gave a sharp, humorless laugh. "Of course he doesn't talk about us. Why would he? This place, my mom, it's nothing anyone would want you to see." Emily remained quiet, letting space exist for the girl's words to emerge naturally. Lily picked absently at the lollipop wrapper, then began speaking. Her voice was low but surprisingly steady, as though she had rehearsed this story in her own mind countless times. "Michael used to come home a lot back when Daniel was still alive. He tried to help, tried to hold everything together, but Mom was always drinking, always selling whatever she could get her hands on for more booze, jackets, shoes, even my school supplies. Michael stopped bringing us nice things because she'd just trade them away the moment he left. He hated this place, hated her for what she'd become, but he loved us, especially Daniel." Her young throat tightened visibly. She paused, gathering strength. Emily's heart clenched with painful anticipation. She could sense the truth pressing toward the surface, a truth she wasn't entirely certain she was prepared to receive. "Daniel was different," Lily continued, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "He was strong in ways Michael couldn't be. He stayed behind even when Michael escaped to Cleveland. He tried to protect me, even from Mom when she got really bad. And he genuinely believed he could somehow save her." Emily waited, barely breathing. "One winter a couple of years ago, Mom was with this guy named Tony." Lily's voice turned cold, brittle as the ice forming at the lake's edges. "Tony was mean, always drunk, always looking for a fight. One night he came after Mom with a knife. I don't even remember what they were arguing about. Something stupid, probably." Daniel jumped between them. He tried to stop Tony, tried to protect her even though she never deserved it. Lily's hands trembled slightly, but her eyes remained fixed on the gray water. "Daniel got stabbed before anyone could do anything. By the time the ambulance arrived, it was already too late. He bled out right there on the living room floor. Michael wasn't here that weekend. There was a snowstorm, and he couldn't make it back in time." The words struck Emily like physical blows. She pressed her hand over her mouth, fighting the rising wave of horror and grief. "He screamed at Mom at the funeral," Lily continued, her voice hollow. "Told her she had killed Daniel, that if she hadn't let Tony into our lives, Daniel would still be alive. And maybe she did kill him. Maybe we all did just by existing in this broken place. Emily blinked back burning tears. She wanted desperately to reach out, to offer comfort, but she sensed that Lily wasn't seeking consolation. She was simply telling her truth because no one else would listen. That's why Michael never comes back, Lily said finally, turning those piercing green eyes directly toward Emily. He blames himself. He thinks if he'd been here that night, Daniel wouldn't have died. The guilt is eating him alive, even if he pretends it isn't. Silence descended between them. A cold wind rippled across the lake's surface, carrying the bitter smell of distant smoke. Emily swallowed hard against the lump in her throat. In that moment, she finally understood everything. Why Michael never touched alcohol, why he refused to discuss his family, why he shut down whenever she pressed too close to his past. His silence wasn't rooted in pride or calculated secrecy. It was pure, unprocessed grief. And sitting beside this fierce, wounded girl at the edge of a forgotten lake, Emily understood that the truth she had uncovered represented only the beginning of a much longer journey. The drive back to Cleveland felt interminable, though the distance hadn't changed. The highway stretched endlessly before her, but Emily's mind was burdened with the weight of everything she had learned. Lily's words replayed on a continuous loop, her young voice flat and matter of fact, yet saturated with wounds so deep they might never fully close. 4 siblings, a mother consumed by addiction, a brother buried far too young, and Michael, trapped somewhere in the middle of it all, carrying guilt that was never rightfully his to bear. Emily gripped the steering wheel with white knuckles. For years she had wondered about Michael's silence, his refusal to discuss family, his unwavering abstinence from alcohol. Now she finally understood. Every sip of liquor didn't merely remind him of the chaos he had escaped. It dragged him back to that terrible night when he lost Daniel forever. His sobriety wasn't discipline alone. It was survival. The Cleveland skyline materialized against the fading afternoon sky, familiar outlines rising like old friends. Emily's chest ached with conflicting emotions. She loved Michael more fiercely than ever, now understanding the incredible strength it had taken for him to construct a new life from such devastating wreckage. But she couldn't ignore the girl she had left behind. Lily, with her fierce green eyes and brittle courage, remained trapped in that collapsing house, still bracing herself against chaos that had already stolen far too much from her young life. That evening, Emily stepped into her parents' home. Patricia noticed the shadow in her daughter's eyes immediately. Dinner sat waiting on the table, roast chicken, potatoes, all the comforting aromas of stability and love, but Emily could barely taste any of it. "Sweetheart, what's wrong?" Patricia asked softly, reaching across to touch her daughter's hand. Emily hesitated, then shook her head slowly. "Nothing you can fix, Mom. I've just been thinking about the wedding." George glanced up from his plate with surprise. "Changed your mind about the big celebration already?" Emily drew a steadying breath. "Yes, I don't want the grand wedding anymore. I don't need banquet halls, limousines, or elaborate flower arrangements. What I want is simple, just Michael, me, and the people who genuinely matter, and that means Lily should be there." Confusion crossed Patricia's face. "Lily? She's Michael's little sister," Emily explained, her voice trembling with conviction. "I met her today. She deserves far better than the life she's currently trapped in. She deserves to witness her brother starting fresh, to know she hasn't been forgotten." George leaned back thoughtfully. "Emily, we don't even know this girl. Are you certain about this?" "I've never been more certain of anything in my entire life," Emily interrupted firmly, meeting both their gazes. "You've given me everything: stability, safety, unconditional love. Lily has none of that. Michael and I are building a new life together. I want her to be part of it, not left behind in that nightmare." Patricia exchanged a long glance with George, her expression gradually softening with understanding. "You really care about this girl," she said quietly. Emily nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "She's just a child, Mom. She's had to grow up far too fast. Michael has been keeping her afloat from a distance, even though he won't admit it. I can't marry him while pretending she doesn't exist. Our wedding should celebrate love and family, and she is his family." Silence lingered for a moment, then Patricia reached across the table, squeezing Emily's hand firmly. "If this is truly what you want, then we'll support you, whatever it takes." George sighed, shaking his head slowly but without anger. Only resignation and perhaps a trace of paternal pride. "All right, no grand wedding. If bringing this girl into your life brings you peace, then that's exactly what we'll do." Relief washed through Emily like a wave breaking on shore. For the first time since leaving Youngstown, she felt a fragile sliver of hope emerging. The road ahead would be complicated. Michael's pain wouldn't evaporate overnight, and Lily's shattered world couldn't be repaired with a single kind gesture. But Emily understood one fundamental truth now. Love wasn't merely about sharing joy. It was about shouldering burdens together. About refusing to abandon the people who needed you most, even when the path forward seemed impossibly difficult. That night, lying awake in her childhood bedroom, Emily imagined a wedding stripped of glittering chandeliers and endless guest lists. Instead, she envisioned a small circle of people who genuinely mattered. She pictured Michael standing beside her, steadier than ever. And Lily, shy but present, watching her brother begin a life where the shadows of their shared past no longer held dominion. For the first time in weeks, Emily felt something resembling peace. Not because the questions had disappeared, but because she finally understood the answers. The days accumulated as spring crept closer, and wedding discussions persisted. But Emily found herself increasingly restless, unable to keep the truth she had uncovered locked away any longer. Each time she looked at Michael, his steady hands making morning coffee, his calm voice discussing their shared future, she saw the shadows lurking behind his eyes. She carried Lily's words inside her like a secret too heavy to bear in solitude. One evening, as they sat together at the kitchen table after dinner, Emily folded her hands tightly and drew courage from somewhere deep within. Michael, she said softly, I need to tell you something important. Looked up, initially distracted, then concerned when he noticed the tension radiating from her. What is it? I went to Youngstown. The words landed like stones dropped into still water. For a long moment, he sat frozen, processing the impossible statement. Then his face drained completely of color, his mouth falling open in shock. You what? His chair scraped harshly against the floor as he pushed back. Emily, why would you? How could you? I met Lily. The name seemed to immobilize him entirely. His hand trembled visibly against the table's edge. You shouldn't have gone there, he whispered, his voice sharp with barely controlled panic. You don't understand what that place is like. You don't know what she's been through, what I've spent years trying to shield you from. You were never supposed to see any of it. Emily reached across the table, her fingers brushing his rigid arm. Michael, listen to me. I do understand now. I saw the house, I met Carol, and I spoke with Lily for hours. She's just a child, Michael. She needs you desperately, and she needs to know she hasn't been abandoned. He pulled back as if her touch burned. His breathing quickened, his dark eyes wild with panic and old, unhealed wounds. You don't understand, he repeated. I've kept you away from that world for a reason. It's toxic. It destroys everything and everyone it touches. I promised myself I would never drag you into it. Her voice steadied, calm against the storm building inside him. I understand far more than you realize. I know about Daniel. Lily told me everything. Michael flinched violently as if she had struck him. His jaw tightened, and for a long, terrible moment, he simply stared at her in devastated silence. Then slowly, as though his bones could no longer support his weight, he sank back into his chair. He buried his face in his hands, his broad shoulders beginning to shake with the weight of memories he had never allowed himself to voice. I should have been there, he said hoarsely, his words muffled against his palms. If I hadn't stayed in Cleveland that weekend, if I had just pushed through the snowstorm, Daniel would still be alive. He wouldn't have had to fight alone. I failed him, Emily. I failed my brother when he needed me most. Emily's eyes blurred with tears, but her voice remained steady and strong. It wasn't your fault. You couldn't have stopped what happened that night. No one could have. You didn't fail Daniel, Michael. You were barely more than a kid yourself. You've been carrying this guilt for years, and it doesn't belong to you. It never did. He shook his head violently, refusing the absolution she offered. You don't understand what it's like to live with that image burned into your mind. The blood, the screaming. My mother too drunk to even comprehend what had happened until it was already too late. I told myself I would never go back. That cutting myself off completely was the only way I could survive. Emily leaned closer, her hand resting gently over his clenched fists. Survival isn't enough anymore. Lily is still trapped there. She looks up to you more than you know. She loves you fiercely, even though she pretends otherwise. And whether you're ready to accept it or not, she is part of our life now. When we get married, I want her standing beside us, not out of pity, not out of obligation, but because she is your family, our family. Michael lifted his red-rimmed eyes to meet hers. His voice emerged cracked and vulnerable. You really mean that? Every single word, Emily whispered. We cannot change what happened in the past, but we can absolutely change the future. For Lily, for us, for Daniel's memory. Don't you think he would have wanted that? Michael swallowed hard, his entire body trembling as though every carefully constructed wall he had built was finally crumbling. At last, he nodded, his voice barely audible. Yes, he would have wanted exactly that. Silence settled between them, but it was no longer burdened with secrets. For the first time, Michael allowed his deepest pain to be witnessed, and Emily, steady and unwavering, held that pain with him, bearing the weight together. In that moment, their wedding ceased being about parties or traditions. It became about redemption. About constructing a family defined not by the devastation of the past, but by the deliberate choice to stand together in the present and move forward into an uncertain but hopeful future. On a brilliant Saturday morning in late spring, Emily and Michael stood together inside the Manning County Courthouse. There was no grand aisle, no orchestral accompaniment, no elaborate floral arrangements. Just warm sunlight streaming through tall windows, dancing across polished floors, and the quiet efficiency of a clerk preparing their marriage documents. Emily wore a simple cream-colored dress that brushed her knees, elegant in its understated beauty. Michael stood beside her in a navy suit, his posture straight and dignified, though his hands trembled slightly with emotion. When the judge invited them to join hands, Emily felt the strength in Michael's grip, the quiet determination that had carried him through unimaginable darkness. The ceremony was brief. A handful of meaningful words, vows spoken softly with complete sincerity, signatures inscribed across official paper, and then it was complete. They were husband and wife. Emily's parents applauded warmly, Patricia dabbing at her eyes with a delicate tissue. George cleared his throat gruffly, hiding deep emotion behind practiced formality. Two of Michael's closest friends from work offered heartfelt congratulations. But the moment that resonated most deeply came when Lily stepped forward. She wore a borrowed floral dress and new sandals Emily had purchased for her just days before. She looked small, almost fragile, yet her green eyes shone with unmistakable pride and hope. "You look beautiful," she whispered to Emily before throwing her arms around Michael in a fierce embrace. He bent down, holding his little sister close, his face buried in her hair as tears slipped silently down his cheeks. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to believe that family didn't have to mean pain. After the courthouse ceremony, the small group walked to a modest diner just down the street. It wasn't elegant, vinyl booths, chrome stools, the lingering aroma of coffee and bacon, but it felt absolutely right. They filled a corner table with genuine laughter and plates piled with pancakes, omelets, and burgers. Emily's best friend captured photos on her phone, documenting moments more authentic than any professionally staged portrait. Michael carefully cutting a modest cake while Lily grinned beside him. Patricia teaching the girl how to stir cream into her first real coffee. George leaning back with a rare, genuine smile as he watched his daughter radiate happiness. The waitress, curious about the intimate celebration, eventually realized it was a wedding. She brought out a slice of pie with congratulations written in chocolate syrup, refusing to accept payment for the gesture. The entire table erupted in cheers as Emily and Michael shared a forkful. It wasn't champagne in crystal glasses, but somehow it was sweeter than anything either of them had ever imagined. As the meal concluded, Michael rose and cleared his throat, his voice thick with emotion as he addressed the small gathering. "I know this isn't the kind of wedding most people expect," he began, "but for me it's more than I ever dared hope for. For years I convinced myself I didn't deserve this. Peace, love, a family that believes in me." He paused, fighting to maintain composure. "Today proves I was wrong." He reached for Lily's small hand. "And having Lily here," his voice broke completely. "It means more than I can ever express." Lily squeezed his hand tightly, her young chin trembling though she held her head high. "I'm glad you didn't forget me," she whispered, loud enough for only Michael and Emily to hear. Later, as plates were cleared and coats gathered, Michael pulled Emily aside. He held a small envelope containing official documents. "I've already spoken with a lawyer," he said quietly. "I want to begin the process of becoming Lily's legal guardian. Child Protective Services will need to conduct evaluations. There will be court hearings, but I refuse to leave her in that house a single day longer than absolutely necessary." Emily's eyes brimmed with tears of joy and determination. She touched his cheek tenderly. "We'll do this together. She's our responsibility now, our family." Outside, the afternoon sun bathed the street in warm golden light. Michael, Emily, and Lily walked side by side toward the car, the girl clasping both their hands as though terrified to ever let go. For years, Michael had associated family only with guilt and devastating loss. But now, with Emily on one side and Lily on the other, he experienced something entirely unfamiliar. Hope. The transition wasn't seamless or effortless. Their once quiet apartment now echoed with the sounds of a 12-year-old navigating an entirely new world. Lily's laughter rang through hallways when she discovered a pair of roller skates at a thrift shop Emily had taken her to. Her school books sprawled across the kitchen table each evening, her scribbled notes mixing comfortably with Michael's work files and Emily's household lists. Initially, Lily moved through the apartment cautiously, as though anticipating the welcome might vanish at any moment. But daily, Emily and Michael reinforced that she truly belonged. They cooked meals together, shared stories at dinner, and established new routines that felt like building blocks of a real family. Emily helped her with challenging homework while Michael introduced her to the local boxing gym, teaching her proper form and technique. Gradually, the haunted look in Lily's young eyes began softening into something resembling peace. Of course, nothing about the legal transition proved simple. Michael spent countless hours on the phone with lawyers and social workers, navigating the complicated process required to become Lily's official guardian. Child Protective Services conducted multiple home visits, inspecting every corner of the apartment for safety concerns, reviewing their finances meticulously, interviewing both Michael and Emily extensively. The court demanded background checks, character references, documented proof of stable employment. The process was exhausting, often frustrating, but Michael never complained. One evening, after another lengthy consultation with their lawyer, Michael collapsed onto the couch, rubbing his tired face. "It feels like they're measuring every inch of my life," he admitted wearily, "waiting for me to fail." Emily settled beside him, resting her head on his shoulder comfortingly. "They're not waiting for failure. They just want absolute certainty that Lily will be safe, and she is. You've already been caring for her in every way that genuinely matters." Her words proved prophetic. At the first formal hearing, the judge reviewed the comprehensive case file, noting Michael's spotless record, his stable employment, and the strong support system provided by Emily and her family. Carol didn't contest the petition. In fact, she never even appeared in court. By midsummer, Michael received full legal guardianship of Lily. The afternoon they emerged from the courthouse with the official papers, Lily clutched the documents against her chest like a shield against everything she had survived. Michael bent down, his voice breaking with emotion. "You're with us now, permanently. No one can ever take that away." Emily blinked back tears as Lily buried her face in her brother's chest. In that transformative moment, the Harris family truly began healing, not by erasing the past, but by consciously choosing a different future. Months later, on a gray November morning, Michael proposed something he had avoided for years. "I want to take you both to see Daniel." His tone was steady, though his hands twisted together nervously. So they drove back toward Youngstown, the air crisp with early winter's bite. The cemetery occupied a low hill outside town, quiet and solemn. Brown, brittle leaves clung stubbornly to bare branches overhead. Michael carried a bouquet of white chrysanthemums, his steps heavy as he led the way to a modest headstone engraved with his brother's name. Daniel Harris, beloved son and brother. For a long moment, Michael couldn't speak. He sank to his knees before the grave, his shoulders trembling violently. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice cracking beneath the weight of years. "I should have been there. I should have protected you." Tears streamed freely down his face. He pressed his palm flat against the cold stone, his breath visible in the frigid air. Emily knelt beside him, wrapping her arms securely around his back. Lily stood close, silent but unwavering, her small hand resting on her brother's shoulder. "You didn't fail him," Emily murmured gently. "You've carried this guilt far too long. Daniel wouldn't want you living this way. He would want you to keep moving forward to protect Lily, to build the life you both dreamed about when you were young." Michael closed his eyes, letting the words sink slowly into the wounded places within him. For years, he had carried the moment of his brother's death like chains wrapped around his soul. But here, with his wife and sister beside him, he felt the crushing weight beginning to lift. The grief remained, it always would. But for the first time, it no longer defined his entire existence. As they rose together, snowflakes began drifting down, soft and delicate, the first of the season. The cemetery grew hushed, blanketed in white that felt almost sacred. Emily slipped her hand into Michael's while Lily held the other. Together, they stood before Daniel's grave, a family painstakingly rebuilt from loss. Michael drew a deep breath, the cold air sharpening his lungs, then released it slowly. "I forgive myself," he whispered. It wasn't dramatic, not a proclamation shouted into the wind, but it was genuine, and it was enough. The three of them walked back toward the car as snow swirled gently around them, gradually covering the ground in a thin white veil. It was technically the beginning of winter. But for them, it marked the beginning of something far more profound, a new life defined not by what they had lost, but by what they had deliberately chosen to build together. For Emily, the moment carried a message she would treasure forever. Love and compassion couldn't erase tragedy entirely, but they could transform it. They could take the sharpest pain and soften it gradually, turning bleeding wounds into scars that told stories of survival and resilience. And for Michael, the message was even simpler. Family wasn't the chaos he had been born into. Family was the people who chose to stand beside him now. Emily, steady and unyielding. Lily, fierce and unbreakable. Together, they were living proof that even the deepest wounds could eventually heal. As the snow fell thicker, coating the world in peaceful silence, Emily understood the fundamental truth they had discovered together. Love and forgiveness were stronger than grief. And in that truth, the Harris family finally found the peace that had eluded them for so long.